here. There we go. Okay, tape recorder is on.
Can the proposal be different from the final dissertation?
Yeah, we like to, once you turn the proposal into the academic cabinet, or actually you turn it into me, and then I have an advisory team now that we look over that work. If you have any significant changes from what you propose, once I get that, your official copy after this course, then I would ask you just to, email me and say, I made these kind of changes just so we're all together on what you're doing. But yeah, and even as you go through the proposal process, sometimes you'll see things a little more clearly that maybe you'll want to even narrow your topic even further, or you'll have a little different direction on that topic. And that's all fine as you go through the proposal process. But like I say, and then when you get into the dissertation, just if you have any major changes, I'd like to know. And if I feel like that needs to go back to the my advisory committee, then I would take that back to that committee.
If I may add to that, I'm assuming that Conley's question has to do with a drastic change. No, the proposal is the fulfillment of the dissertation is the fulfillment of the proposal. So it could not be that your dissertation is drastically different from your proposal. What is important about the process we are doing now is that we are helping you to lay a good foundation upon which to build as you expand towards producing the completed dissertation. If at all you're going to make a significant change, then as Dr. Payne said, that needs to be communicated to us. So it could not be, because everything is on file. After you've done your proposal and we've accepted it, well, before we accept it, it needs to go to IRB. So between the IRB and the academic committee, then we have agreed to the research that you're going to be doing. And if you went and did something completely different, then there would be a question mark there.
Why I ask is that as I read literature,
yes,
I see new things and I begin to question my topic.
That's normal. That's normal. So in this process, you are going to start making changes. You see what I'm saying? In your proposal, you're going to start making changes. And we expect that to happen. Because when you begin with an idea, as it were, that you start to flesh out. But especially as you read the literature, which we're going to be talking about, the review of the literature, we expect that you are going to make changes, because the purpose of research is not to prove a point that you come into the research class with. The purpose of research is to discover and to uncover. And that's a process. So it should not surprise you, and it certainly wouldn't surprise us as we move along in the discussion that you say, well, I need to make a change. For example, you may, having looked at the literature, you may decide to change the purpose of your study and the questions of your study. Those two are foundational. That's accepted. But once you have come to the end of the process and you have a proposal, then I usually like to think of the proposal as a recipe. So you are going to follow that proposal in terms of your research. Now, it may be at the end of the study, and here we're going to talk now about, well, if you do a quantitative study, if you're testing hypotheses, or even with a qualitative study, you're starting with certain assumptions. It may be that at the end of the process, you have to reflect and say you started out the study with certain expectations, but the data does not confirm your expectations. We don't use the word expectations in research. We talk about assumptions. We talk about hypotheses. So that's normal. That's a good question.
Let me ask you one specific question. Say, Kunle, pronounce your first name.
Yes, that's my first name.
Kunle?
Yes, please.
Okay, Kunle. Have you looked at a few of the other dissertations in the BGU library on the RCCG Church? Because I know that a few others have worked on contextualizing, the gospel message into the U.S. culture. And just want to make sure you kind of look at a few of those other dissertations to see what they've done, which might give you an idea of, what else you maybe would even want to do a little differently so that you could keep adding to the knowledge that RCCG is doing here in the United States.
Yes, I have gone through some of the dissertations that affects the Redeem, the RCCG, and even using the link, I've also gone through some from other institutions in the United States. My dissertation, for example, I came across social identity in terms of relating with culture. I never heard about that before. Mm-hmm. So I begin to realize that that's a very strong factor in my study. So I'm beginning to think maybe I should go that route.
Right.
And that will involve changing the whole topic.
Okay. That's a very good point. Yeah, that whole social identification would be a major issue. Yeah, I think that would be a great focus. I think that would, because I don't think, as I remember some of the other dissertations that were done in the RCCG, I don't think they actually focused on that particular aspect of contextualization, and that would be a great piece, I think, to put into your work. Okay. Any other thoughts or questions before we move ahead? Okay, well, if you think of things, feel free to put them out. Dr. Henry has another presentation. I always like some of the presentations she brings. It kind of really helps introduce some of the topics that we get into, and I think she's got a PowerPoint or a PDF file on the literature review. So if you would maybe be looking for that, Dr. Henry.
Okay, let me share my screen. Okay. Oops. Okay, this one. Yes, I have several PowerPoint presentations on the literature review. Most of them are very long. One that I like, but it is very long, it's about 40-something slides. So I've opted for this one, which is more concise and to the point. Now, there's a sense in which the review of the literature might be described as the heart of the research that you're going to be doing. Because literature, there's some inherent assumptions and statements you're making about your own research. For one thing, you're positioning your research within a stream of research. Your research is not unique. Your approach may be different. Your sample/population may be different, but the concept, The conceptual framework is not new. Authors have studied that conceptual framework. So there's a sense in which, in looking at the literature, you are admitting that your work is not unique. However, your work is significant. It will make a contribution to the research in that area that you're going to be studying. So we're going to look at this PowerPoint presentation, which comes out of Penn State University College of Nursing. I'll go ahead and share. Understanding and critically appraising the literature review. What is the purpose of a literature review? First, it identifies the theoretical and scientific knowledge upon which you are building your research. It and it identifies what the current research study can add to the literature. And then they address the purpose of the review of literature in terms of quantitative studies, and then later we look at the purpose in terms of qualitative studies. For the quantitative study, it directs the development and implementation of a study. It cites relevant and current sources. It documents the background and the significance of the study. And it identifies the theoretical ideas to guide the study. Those four are very important. They're central to the review of literature in the context of a quantitative study. In terms of the qualitative research, the literature review compares and combines study findings with the literature. It tries to explain, support, and extend research theory. It represents a background for the research. It is a way to formulate research questions, and it is also a source of data. With the qualitative research, there is an openness to the research in terms of they state here the formulation of research questions, but it's more about the formulation of research questions and the formulation of hypotheses. In the quantitative research, the purpose of the research is to test the hypotheses. So you start out identifying the hypotheses of your study, 3 to 5 hypotheses. There could be more, but in that ballpark. Whereas in the qualitative study, you don't necessarily identify the hypotheses of your study. You are more likely to identify the assumptions of your study. And then by the end of the study, looking back, comparing the results with the assumptions, you may want to propose hypotheses that can be tested in a study that follows up what you have done. I could stop here for questions or comments. What are typical sources included in a review of the literature? Periodicals and journals, internet publications. We have to be careful with internet publications because the internet is a bottomless pit. So you have to be selective in terms of what internet publications you would use. But the test that we use is to make sure that your sources are reflective of research. Commentaries may be used, but you don't want to have a review of literature that is built around literature that are basically opinion pieces. Since you're doing research, your review of literature must be grounded in research. Conference proceedings, because many times conference proceedings are built on research. People are reporting their research to a conference, etc. Theses and dissertations, books, textbooks. So those are the 6 main areas for which you will look for literature that is relevant to what you want to study. And there are 2 types of sources generally as we look at the literature, what we call primary sources and secondary sources. Primary sources are actually research, other people's research, written and conducted by others. And they focus on theory, written by theorists who develop the theory. Your primary source may not necessarily be a report of a research. If it's a focus on theory, it may be just a philosophical piece or a piece that describes the theory that will undergird your research, but it's a primary source. A secondary source is a paraphrase of the works of researchers and theorists. We advise that you minimize the use of secondary sources. Instead of reading what somebody else reports of the research, go directly to the original research and you read it and understand it for yourself. Okay, you may use secondary sources, but we ask you to minimize those. Okay. Some important questions when you're critically appraising literature reviews. Let me just stop here and say that in the process of searching for and finding appropriate literature, you are likely to find much more literature than you will actually use in your research. And I think this is important for you to understand, because if you come to the process expecting that you will use every piece of literature that you found interesting, you can end up being very confused and frustrated, because there is such an abundance of literature in just about anything that you could think of studying. In the initial phase of doing research, we tend to begin by thinking that, well, nobody else has dealt with this issue. But you just Google your keywords and you see thousands of articles coming up. You're not going to read those thousands. You're just going to read a smidgen of what is there. But your smidgen can go into hundreds. I'm just saying that to say that you're going to be selective, but in the process of being selective, be prepared to read much more than you're going to use. I also say this because sometimes you get carried away with what you're finding and you think, well, oh, I just have to use this. No, you don't have to use it. It must be related to your theoretical framework. It must be related to the questions of your study. It must be related to the assumptions of your study or the hypotheses that are being tested. But you will read much more than you will actually use. And that is okay. That's part of the process of doing research. So what are some questions that you need to ask? Are primary sources cited in the review? It's important that you use your primary sources. But one of the things you do in searching the literature is when you find a primary source, look at the references or the bibliography, because they will lead you into other material that are relevant to what you may be doing. So you can actually use the bibliography / references of the material that you have read that seem to be significant to get you into finding more relevant material. Are the references current? Very important. the research literature recommends that your references should not be more than 5 years old. Now, to be fair to you and to be fair to some of the issues that you are looking at, you may find older material. I say, generally for myself, I look at 10 years as a cutoff point. But the research literature usually says 5 years. It depends on your field of study also. Because the knowledge is exponential. And what we want to be able to look at is knowledge that is more current, especially in certain fields, like in the field of nursing, science, medicine. They have to pay attention to current material. So much of what is there is already outdated because of the evolution of knowledge. So you would understand that in those fields, they pay strict attention to how current your literature is. But the same goes for us. We have to be as current as possible. Are relevant studies identified and described? Are relevant theories identified and described? Are relevant landmark studies described? And are the studies critiqued? One of the things that you should be able to identify as you start to go through the literature, you should be able to identify what are the landmark studies, the significant studies. And one of the ways in which you know a landmark study is that you start to see that several people reference the same study. So when that happens, you know you're looking at a significant piece of study because others are referencing that material. Okay? Questions, comments before I move on?
Dr. Henry, good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
In my looking at some of the literature, I am identifying some work being done by people like the United Nations Development Programs,
yes,
as well as the World Bank programs.
Yes.
Which would reference things like some of the underground experiences they're having working in the particular area. With the particular focus I have local government and issues of governance.
Mm-hmm.
It's some of them are like, well, most of what I am citing, I think falls within the last maybe 10 years or so.
Okay.
Yeah, within that range. Some of them, yeah, most all of them fall within that kind of range.
Mm-hmm.
Some of it would come up as things like discussion notes and conference papers, and that's generally okay. I'm assuming.
Yes.
To be able to use those as
conference proceedings. Mm-hmm.
Okay. I just wanted to be on the same. Make sure we're on the same page. Sometimes one or two of the references might also come from material the UNDP may have on their webpage. Of course, it will not form the major part of the literature that I'm using. Sure. But one or two of the references will come from those kinds of sources. So.
Yes, that would be relevant. And what I would want to say to you, Hubert, and to each of you in the class, when you do the review of literature, and I know in some areas this is a challenge, you want to be able to source literature that comes from the context that you are studying. So for example, in your context, Hubert, is in the developing world. So you want to make sure that, and I know if you're using United Nations material and UNDP material, you certainly would be sourcing material that is reflective or similar to the Guyanese context. That's important, that you source material that reflects your context. And I know for many of us in the developing world, that can be a challenge because over 90% of the research that is reported comes from the Western world. And that is a challenge. And what that means for those of you who are doing your studies within the developing world is that you're going to have to be more diligent seeking out the literature that is reflective of your context.
What if I make a comment here?
Sure.
Sorry. What I found in that regard, because for example, there's a public administration journal coming out of, I think, Oxford University in the UK. And so a lot of the work would be referencing things that are relevant to that society. Well, what is currently happening in public administration there. But maybe for the purposes of my research, there would be lessons that can be learned from those
certainly.
Experiences. Yeah.
Yes, definitely.
So I would want to be able to reference those. And I've seen some work too from Ireland, and I've tried to identify what is relevant. If it's not relevant, I don't touch it, as it were, reference it.
Mm-hmm. Good. As you look at the literature, you ask the question, is the current knowledge about the research problem described? Does the literature review identify gaps in the knowledge base that provides a basis for study? And is the literature review clearly organized, logically developed, and concise? This last point is very important. As you look at the literature, the question about gaps in the knowledge base, that does take some time for you to be able to be familiar with the gaps. And that will also come from the literature itself, because the literature, the research literature does identify in the last section the gaps in the knowledge that have been revealed as a result of the research. You have to be able to identify that yourself as you read the literature. What components are in the literature review? In the review of literature, you look at both what is known and what is not known about the topic. You look at the focus of the study. You report the focus of the research that you have read. And we just talked about the need for sources to be current. In the field of nursing, it's 5 years. Landmark studies may be included if essential to the background of the problem. Landmark studies are always important. And whatever field it is that you are looking at, you want to be able to identify what are the landmark studies. In fact, in the oral review, we will ask you to identify what are the landmark studies around which your research has been built. So you want to be familiar with those landmark studies. What sources are suitable? Academic libraries, special libraries, interlibrary loan, online searches, public libraries. For most of us in our context, we are looking at online searches. ProQuest, we have, well, you may use EBSCO. If you become a member of Christian Scholars, you will get free access to EBSCO. EBSCO is good. Google Scholar is very good. And so you have resources that you could use that are out there. And then, of course, ProQuest, dissertations, etc., previous studies. Those are some of the sources that you may use.
I have a question. When I looked at ProQuest, and I'm wondering about Google Scholars too, although I've done less look at that. Is there a way to save and build your literature reviews so you're not having to go back in? Is there a way, if you have an account, to build your list of literature reviews?
that you have pulled out, I assume that you should be able to do that. Google gives you that choice. So you'd have to look at ProQuest to see if it gives you that choice. For me, I just feel safer to make my own notes and keep it in my system instead of wanting to go back into the system to do it. But you know, you do what works for you.
So you like save it as a PDF into your own files then?
Yeah, I just download the PDF and I save it to my library on my computer. That's what I find that is easy and simple. I don't have to go back in and pull it up, you know, but you do what's best for you, what will be efficient, right? So these are some databases, and they're databases that are used in the nursing profession. EBSCO is definitely a good source, but like I said, BGU does not yet have free access to EBSCO. But if you become a member of the Christian Scholars, then you could get free access to EBSCO. But Google Scholar, you can't go wrong with Google Scholar. There's so many resources that you can access through Google Scholar and ProQuest. That should not be a problem. And of course, please, if you're having problems, contact the librarian, Jennifer, and she will help you to access material.
There are two other databases that helps you build your citations too. I think you just need to create an account, Mendeley and RefWorks. I don't know if you're familiar with that. You can just plug each resource in, and it builds your citations and references for you.
What is that called again? I'm so sorry.
Mendeley, MENDLEY, and then RefWorks.
Okay, who is speaking? Is it Jackie?
Julia, sorry.
Julius, thank you, Julia. One of the things you could do is put that information in the bulletin board.
Okay.
And so everybody will see it. Thank you, I appreciate that.
You're welcome.
Dr. Eric, can you please talk a little bit more about the landmarks?
Say that again.
Landmark studies.
The landmark studies will be studies that are considered, they're important to the field. For example, one of the students I'm supervising is doing a quantitative study that involves self-esteem. And one of the landmark writers in that area is Cooper Smith. And so she's going to use an instrument that was developed by him years ago that people are still using in studies today on self-esteem. Each field of study has its landmark writers and studies. So you have to be able to find those.
Okay.
For yourself, right? Keywords. When you're doing your search, of course, you've learned by now that it's important that you use the right keywords. And the keywords are like major concepts or variables of your research problem. And in last week's exercise, we did some of that, defining your keywords, your concepts, your theoretical framework. It may be a single term or phrases. Most databases have a thesaurus that can help you to identify keywords. And each keyword used should be listed in a written search plan. There are plans that you could use or develop your own. I've always found it easier to develop my own plan, but there are plans online that you could look at and adapt to help you to do your own search.
Let me make one comment too that I've found helpful. There's times if you're using Google Scholar or ProQuest that you'll be directed to a journal article, etc., but it will require a subscription. I found that you can often take that title and then just enter it into a general database like Google and you can find that article other places without paying a subscription. So I just put that forth, that tip to everyone.
Yes.
Jackie, did you have a question? I thought I saw a hand up.
Yes, hello everybody. And Julia, that's a good point with RefWorks. I am a subscriber of RefWorks, so there is a cost for RefWorks.
Okay.
But it works.
Can you spell that for me? I can't understand with our connection.
It's RefWorks. RefWorks. And Julia is absolutely right. It's a wonderful site, but you have to subscribe to that. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, Jackie. Okay. When you do your search, what information should you record? Now, one of the things about doing a literature search and recording information is that you don't want to omit important information. And then when you go back to the drawing board, you find you don't have everything. So identify the name of the database, the date of the search, the exact strategy that you use, the number of articles you found, etc. Build your own means of saving the information. So like you will not find everything at one sitting, definitely not. So what you don't want to do is be wasting time, and every time you sit down to do the search, it's like you're starting over. So you want to be able to identify where you started and where you've ended, so the next time around you're continuing your search. That's important. How do you limit your search? You know, when you put in a keyword, invariably you go to Google Scholar and you literally see thousands of articles coming up, and you know you can't look through all of that. So you want to find a way to limit your search, and one way is to put in the dates. So you're searching for articles between, let's say, 2015 and 2019, or 2012 and 2019, you put in dates. That's one way. Then you may want to look for just full text articles, because you want to be able to download the article right away. But there are limitations to that approach, because the article may not be a full text article that is shown to you, but as Dr. Payne just said, there are ways in which you can get that article full text if you do the study. So you want to take the information, as much information as you can save for yourself, so that you take that now and then go now to find that article full text somewhere else. And then, of course, peer-reviewed publications, journals. You are going to be looking to find material from the journals, because they are peer-reviewed and they represent research.
Let me just mention one other issue. As you're working with databases, some of you are familiar with Boolean logic, some of you aren't. But you know, you can use words like and, or. You can put quotation marks around a phrase. Like if you put quotation marks around a phrase, it'll only bring up articles that have that exact phrase in the article. And usually on any, like I think Google Scholar has it, so does EBSCO, so does ProQuest. They will have a help section that shows how to use what they call the Boolean logic. And again, that's just another way to get more specific information for what you're looking for in terms of a particular database.
Okay, thank you. Advantages and disadvantages to information obtained from the internet. A disadvantage is that oftentimes the information is uneven in terms of accuracy. That is why you want to be sure that you use certain kinds of publications. And then, of course, the internet is a big black hole, so there's no screening process for information put on the web. Again, that's why you want to look at journal articles, and peer-reviewed articles. It is important to check the source of any information obtained from the web to judge its validity. So basically, all it's saying is that you need to be, if you're not going to be using peer-reviewed articles, then you need to be able to validate the article that you're going to use in terms of its meaningfulness to the study that you are going to be doing. Steps in writing a literature review. First, the purpose. You want to document current knowledge of the selected topic and indicate the findings ready for use in practice. We recommend that you use an outline, an introduction, then you go to the body of the paper, the empirical literature, and then of course, the summary of your material. What is included in the introduction? The focus or purpose of the review. Now, the focus or purpose of the review must match the purpose of your research. So you use that as a basis to guide you to find the literature that would be of use to your study. It describes the organization of the sources, that is the introduction, and it indicates the basis for ordering. Usually we start with the most important to the least, or we start with the earliest publications to the most recent, but you have a way of categorizing your sources, and you do that in the introduction. So in the introduction, you may begin with a statement, with a restatement of the purpose of your study. And then you may identify, as a result of the purpose of the study, you may identify how your literature review is organized. And in the organization is usually thematic. So what are the themes that you're going to focus on in your particular study? What is included in the database literature? It includes quality studies relevant to the topic. It includes, for each study, you want to look at purpose, sample design, sample size, design, specific studies as presented. Now that is especially relevant to those of you doing a quantitative study. But for the qualitative study, you still have to look at purpose. You need to look at assumptions of the study. The qualitative study, you may be doing focus group, etc. You need to look at the research at hand and look at if they have used focus group as a method of getting the data, how many focus groups were used, what was the size of each focus group, things like that you want to pay attention to. And then lastly, scholarly but a brief critique of the study's strength and weaknesses. What is included in the summary section of your review of literature? A concise presentation of the research knowledge about the selected topic, some judgment stating whether there is adequate knowledge to direct a change. Well, here, because it's nursing, they reference clinical practice, and a brief statement of proposed change of practice. These two are contextual because this presentation comes out of the field of nursing. Okay, questions, comments. I do have a longer PowerPoint presentation that covers just about everything in the review of literature. I could put that into the system so that you could look at it for yourself. But questions or comments based on what we have just presented and discussed? I will stop sharing.
Question?
Yes, go ahead. oddly.
Is literature review basically a glorified book report? Is that what it is? Am I?
No, it's more succinct than a book report.
So how does that fit in terms of your overall research? Is it then to be incorporated? That are you just trying to get information from other sources, but are you to incorporate them in your actually project itself? Like, what's the difference between reading and using it as opposed to reading? Are you doing both? Can we be doing both? Reading and drawing on it for your research, but also reporting what you've read.
Yes, you're right. You're doing both. You've answered your question. The literature review, as I said earlier, is your way of situating your research in the field. So, for example, you want to look at rites of passage in order to help boys transition to manhood.
Right.
So you want to read research reports on rites of passage and transitioning to manhood. That literature may be in some other context, different to the context in which you are doing your study. Nevertheless, there is learning, there is significance in terms of findings in those contexts that you could apply to the context you want to study rites of passage and transitioning to manhood in. So you would read that literature to learn what others have done, what studies have been done, what population participated in the study, what were the results, etc. And you want to be aware of that as you propose your own research. Does that make sense to you?
Okay.
Let me make one other comment in that regard. You were asking, the difference between a book report and a literature review. And we tried to make that distinction in our handbook, that we aren't looking for a book report. A book report, of course, is just the way you organize a series of book reports, like we've done for VGU courses. You give the title of a book, and then you kind of summarize the premise of that book. You analyze what the author said, and then you draw some conclusions. You may do some of that in a literature review, but for me, anyway, the idea of a literature review is you're comparing what various authors say about a particular topic. You organize a literature review chapter topically. You don't organize the chapter by titles of books. You organize it topically, and then you will discuss and compare, analyze and compare what various authors are saying about a particular topic. How they may agree, how they may disagree, how they maybe relate or not relate with your particular project, how you agree or disagree with what they're doing, how your project may expand a bit on what one of those authors has said, etc. So again, the book report is organized according to titles of books, where a literature review is topically organized. And the other thing I think I've said in the instruction sheet, and you've got the PowerPoint that Dr. Henry just presented, and I think she'll probably put both the long version and the shorter version in the files area. And then I also have the instruction sheet for the assignment for this week, which says there we really want to see that literature review organized very typically according to the components of your theoretical framework. Okay, that's the place that you can give your reader more understanding and background on particular aspects of your theoretical framework, the various theories, models, principles, concepts that are germane to your particular project, and then how you're going to apply those particular principles, concepts, theoretical framework to the particular work that you're doing. So one exception, and I'm going to ask you to comment on this, Dr. Henry, to see what your experience has been. in a quantitative study, I've seen quite a few dissertations that they actually organize the literature review according to the hypotheses.
Yes.
And I think that seems to be a typical approach for a quantitative study. In our class, I've always said to, organize the literature review according to the components of your theoretical framework. And I don't know if you can address that at all, just on those, on little shades of meaning there in terms of how we might organize that literature review.
Yes, with a quantitative study, one of the ways to organize the literature review is to use the hypotheses, because in the quantitative study, the hypotheses propose relationship between the variables, the concepts. So that is a perfect way to organize your research. In the qualitative study, you could use themes coming out of your the purpose of your study and the assumptions of the study. You could the theoretical framework. You could use that to identify the main themes and develop your literature review around the main themes of the study.
Okay, yeah, and that's been the main way that we've always organized literature reviews. It's around themes. But if anybody would like to, kind of work with, if you're doing a quantitative study and you would like to use your particular hypotheses, like Dr. Henry said, you are comparing variables, the dependent variable, the independent variable. And hopefully you've read about some of what those concepts mean, even in your reading so far. But yeah, you could organize your literature review based on, say you have 3 or 4 hypotheses. You could use each one of those hypotheses as a topic to discuss, because that will get you into discussing the variables, and it will get you into relating the components of your theoretical framework to each of the hypotheses. So yeah, do some thinking, some reading on those areas, and you can kind of determine for yourself, what's the best way you would like to organize your particular literature review.
I have a question. So kind of going back to what Audley said. So that first week where you had us do literature reviews, that was kind of getting used to how to look up the material.
Right.
Now you're talking about this chapter actually analyzing the material as it pertains to your study, correct?
Correct.
Okay. In order to know how robust that we're making it, and again, I'm a organizational thinker and I have to wrap my mind around something before I can execute. So are you talking about how many reviews on average? Are you talking 20 to 40? Are you thinking 50 to 70? Like, how do you know you've done a robust enough job at finding literary reviews to analyze and to section off into themes for your study?
Yeah, I think our handbook, I'd have to look it up again. I forget what I put there, but I think it's either 30 or 35 sources we'd like you to analyze within the literature review.
Okay, thank you.
And there again, remember, for the proposal, well, let me just back up. The total proposal should be somewhere between 40 to 50 pages, not more than 50 pages, because if you get more than 50 pages, you're kind of getting into the actual writing of the dissertation. So in the proposal, you may not be quite as involved in analyzing the sources. I don't want to press that point too far, because we want to make sure you do an adequate job there in the proposal. As you do more research, as you're getting into the actual preparing to write the actual dissertation report, you may have discovered more that you would like to write about a particular source, a particular topic, because you've done more research on it. I should look up the handbook, but look in the handbook. I think it gives there how many sources should be in the proposal, how many sources should be in the actual dissertation report. And of course, and again, you're not going to include every source in your reference list in your literature review. You know, your reference list maybe be 50, 75 sources, maybe more. I think we asked for a minimum of 50 sources in the reference list, whereas, you know, you may be choosing, you know, 30, 35, 40 of those sources that are very significant to you that you're going to include in the literature review that's seeing some of the most
not
important
everything
sources.
that's in the reference list is actually expounded upon in your literary review.
Right, absolutely,
So,
yeah.
but you do need to list everything that you've referenced as far as research and information.
Yeah, in the reference list, in APA, you list in the reference list only sources that you have actually cited, okay? If you're in a Turabian, for example, a Turabian bibliography lists both sources that are cited and sources that were consulted. It gets a little confusing. For APA, though, you only put in the reference list, say in the proposal, the sources that you actually cited in a parenthetical reference somewhere in the proposal, and likewise with the dissertation. Only those sources that you have a parenthetical citation somewhere in the dissertation should be in the reference list. There may be, you know, a series of other sources that you consulted that you think could be helpful for the reader to be aware of. You could then create a second list in your dissertation, for example. You could they could be, say, other sources or other sources consulted, and that would let the reader know these are other sources that are helpful to the topic, but you did not cite them within, you know, within the actual text.
Okay, if I may just add to that Dr. Payne has just mentioned, for the purpose of the proposal that you're going to be submitting, we're following APA rules. So in the references, you will only put material that you've used in the actual paper. Now you may put, for the proposal, we recommend you put a second list, and that is an anticipated reading list, something of the sort. So there's other material that you have found that is relevant, but you have not yet cited them in your review of the literature. So you're going to put that list so we get a sense and a feel for how well you have been researching the topic that you're going to study.
Question. Is there expectation of what the sources, whether it be books or journals? Is there a balance, or is there any formula for that, please?
From what we have just said, journals. Because journals reference research, immediate research. You can use books, and books are important too. And the books that you're looking at are books that reference research. The thing about it, however, is that when you're wanting to be timely or up to date, the books tend to lag behind the journal in terms of dates. You know, they tend to be more dated. So that's why you want to keep your focus on the journals, on the peer-reviewed articles.
Is a better way to say that, possibly even too, that your journals are in the literary reviews, but you may reference books throughout your dissertation and other chapters?
No, in the in other chapters in the dissertation, you're not necessarily referencing other books. It is the chapter 2 of the dissertation that is your review of literature. That's where you reference the literature. It may be that in chapter 5, when you pull it on together, you go back to chapter 2, but you're not going to be referencing in chapter 5 new material. Whatever material you're going to reference, you've already referenced in chapter 2, the review of the literature. Is that a head scratcher?
Yeah. Okay. One of the things I realized when you're reading, you find that the researchers quote other researchers.
Sure.
So do you then quote them quoting somebody else, like in your
Okay, Turabian gives you the instructions on how you do secondary quotes. So I would, instead of giving you an answer, I use Turabian like I use my dictionary. I will go to Turabian for the instructions on how you reference secondary sources. So when somebody references somebody else's work and you want to reference that,
right,
there is instruction
oh,
on how you do that. You go straight to Turabian and follow that instruction.
okay.
I promise you I don't carry that in my head. It's in the book.
All right.
So again, I'm sorry, I'm trying to keep up with all the discussion. So oddly, what you're saying is, I think what's being said is that all the literary review is in chapter 2, possibly referenced back in chapter 5, but the rest of it is all our original thought process analysis of our actual dissertation project, correct?
Are you asking me?
No,
Oh, sorry.
I'm trying to clarify the discussion we just had.
Okay, Suzanne, the dissertation, chapter 1, introduction, chapter 2, review of the literature, chapter 3 is method, chapter 4 is results, and chapter 5 is discussion. So 1, 2, and 3 are the 3 chapters that you're likely to use sources. That's the proposal. Okay. After that, you are just reporting your results,
yeah,
and your chapter 5. So I hope that answers your question. That's it.
Let me make another comment. This is Bill. First of all, I just looked up in the handbook. For the literature review, the proposal, we want about 20 sources that you're analyzing in the proposal. We need at least 30 sources in the literature review in the actual dissertation report. Okay, so 20 and 30. In terms of what you're doing, say in the literature review chapter, like I said before, you've either organized that chapter according to themes, topics as parts of your theoretical framework, or if you want to take a try at organizing it by hypotheses for a quantitative study, you could do that also. But in that chapter, you're looking at what various authors have said about your particular topic. You're comparing possibly what one author says in comparison to what another author says. Okay, so there's sometimes that comparative work that's going on. But there's also a place for your analysis of what has just been said by an author.
Yeah.
Okay, that's where your personal input could come into even the literature, because you are expected to analyze the literature. You're not just reporting it, for example. You're actually I always say you're interacting with the literature. Okay, so you are giving your thought processes, your analysis of what's happening with particular sources and particular opinions, and especially as they may relate to your specific project area.
One quick comment, and this is in relation to the references for the literature review, because I think you were just, Dr. Payne, saying that out of the handbook, it's about 20 references for the literature review. I was noting in the assignment page for this week that it was saying 35 for the literature sources. There should be a minimum of 35. Is the handbook going to be the updated one that we use?
Okay, remember, I think you had mentioned references. The reference list contains all the sources that you used in the proposal, okay? And I'm saying I'd like to see a minimum of 35 sources that you consulted and that you've somehow included in your reference list, and possibly the works you're going to consult for the future. That's what the number 35 refers to, not the literature review. The literature review chapter needs to include a minimum of 20 sources that you interact with, analyze, within the context of your study. So 20 sources for the proposal in the literature review chapter, 35 total sources should appear at least in the reference list. Okay. And when you get into the dissertation, the actual dissertation report, the requirement is there needs to be a minimum of 30 sources that you have discussed in a literature review chapter. There needs to be a minimum of 50 total sources that you have used for that project, for that dissertation project. You know, and most students have somewhere between 50, 75 sources that they've actually used in the dissertation project.
Please, if I may ask, I noticed that the PowerPoint that Dr. Henry used was saying that the age of the references or the work cited should be like 5 years. That's for nursing. I remember I did a study previously, and my professor was telling me if I use anything older than 10 years, it crossed them out.
Mm-hmm.
Old.
True. Yes, agree.
So he told me it shouldn't be more than 10 years. Is there a specific time that BGU uses?
Okay. I'll answer for myself.
Okay.
10 years is the maximum, but it also depends on the type of material.
Right.
There, in every field, there are classic works. Like Cooper Smith's work, I think it's 1930s. I think, if I remember rightly. In every field, there are classic works.
Okay.
And if a work is a classic work, as a professor, we need to know that. So if you have something that is as old as that, we can say yes.
Okay. Right.
All right. Who determines what's
let me add my thought to that first, Audley, and then I'll let you go on. In terms of source dating, okay, I think Dr. Henry just said it. You know, the context is important. Generally speaking, you're going to use sources that are, you know, not more than 10 years. And if you're given any statistical information, it probably shouldn't be any more than 1 or 2 years, okay? Because we want the most recent statistics that you can come up with in relationship to a topic. There are, as Dr. Henry said, there are other classical types of sources that you may engage. If, say, you're dealing with the theology section of your literature review, there, of course, are classic theological works, and we can look at classical biblical scholars, and some of their work may be dating to the early 1900s. Okay, but you want to, you know, you may want to bring some of that information into your, you know, into your theological discussion, and that would be fine. There may be some historical information that would be helpful for your reader to understand in terms of the context of your study, where you're doing that. And there again, those sources may obviously be more than 10 years old, okay? But in terms of the, you know, statistical information, when you're looking at the theoretical frameworks and what's been, you know, happening in terms of models, research, empirical research that's been going on particular you know, topics, that's where these numbers of 5 years, 10 years comes into the picture.
So a book like The Servant Leadership, it's like a landmark source.
Right, exactly.
Looking back to, you know, 20th century.
Yes, absolutely, and that would be very, very appropriate to quote some content from that particular leadership source.
Thank you very much.
Audley, go ahead. You had a thought.
So I wondered, who determines what's a classic? Who is the judge of that?
The field of academics and scholars. When the researchers, you look at the work, a classic work is a classic work. It's the material speaks for itself. But one way in which you know that is the amount of references, how many people are using that work in their own work, how that work has been used to further the field, to do research.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Hi, Dr. Henry. That would, I mean, in some of the earlier discussion, is that the same? That would be the same landmark work
Yes.
that we.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Classic landmark. Yes, same thing.
that is a problem. I mean, if you've not worked in a particular field, you may not really understand, what are really, quote, landmark studies and what are classic studies. When you're in Google Scholar or ProQuest, you can look up the number of times a particular, say, journal article or report has been cited. But unfortunately, Google Scholar and ProQuest, I don't think, neither one of them actually include books, as far as I know. I think most of them are confined to journal articles, if I'm not mistaken.
No, Google Scholar has books.
Does Google Scholar have books?
Yeah.
Okay,
Books.
I didn't realize that.
Yeah,
ProQuest is pretty much government reports and journal reports.
Google Scholar shows you books all the time.
Okay.
Simply, I would say to you, just Google landmark studies in X, whatever it is you are interested in, and see what comes up.
Okay.
Just Google that. I can tell you that.
Let me ask you a question, Dr. Henry. You used Google Scholar probably more than I have, but in Google Scholar, if you bring up a book, will it actually give you the statistics on how often that book has been cited in articles?
I don't remember, but
Okay.
it probably will. It
Okay.
probably will.
Yeah.
Yeah.
See, to me, that would be a helpful statistic to
Mhm.
determine whether a particular book is considered a fairly landmark study. If it seems to have a big number in terms of how often it's been cited in various other research articles.
Yeah, they'll give you books.
Yeah, Google Scholar does give you the number of times it's cited, the books are cited.
Good.
Yeah.
Okay.
Question. How
Sure.
much do you bring into play previous readings from other studies that you've done? Is that appropriate to refer that in terms of your present research?
What do you mean by previous readings?
Well, in terms of courses I've taken on it, that seems relevant to what I'm doing now. Like I would have done something, say I write a passage in the past. Now I'm talking about it now. Do I reference that?
Well, referencing yourself, you mean?
I'm sorry?
Your own studies? Yeah, you can do that. And APA actually gives you the format when you're going to reference, one of your own studies. You actually do reference it just like you would reference any other source. Okay. But yeah, you can bring those into the study. We are asking, of course, when you work on a current dissertation, that you're not just kind of redoing a study that you've already done. Okay.
Right.
You need to be doing new research, of course, for the current dissertation work. But you can quote yourself and findings that you have from previous studies that are relevant to what you're doing now.
Okay.
Okay, I've got about almost 25 minutes past the hour, so I think we've been working at this for about an hour and 25 minutes. So I think we're going to close our session at that point. Appreciate all the comments. Yeah, just keep working at your discussions groups. I jump into those occasionally just to see what you're saying, and I feel like you've been doing some good work there in the discussion areas. There
Yes.
again, I will interact with you on the written assignment quite a bit, and please do make sure you give me those assignments within the template so that I can look at your whole work and give you some good feedback on that, hopefully. Okay, with that, we're going to end the meeting. Again, thank you, and we will be at the same time, same place next week, and we'll continue our discussions. Thank you.
Thank you. Have a good week.
Okay, good night.
Thank you too. Bless you.
I know.
Bye-bye.